Well, welcome everyone to a special edition of Political Power Ranker. Chris Berg, Director of Politics for Nexstar affiliates across the country. To my right, Henry Ross, political reporter, Pix TV,
Great
New
to be here.
York. Hello, Henry. And to my left, the man, the legend, the myth, the sum, Spencer Kimball, Emerson College Polling Director. Emerson, or Spencer, great to have you here, right next to me.
Yeah, I appreciate the accolades. Always nice to come to the city and be spoken so fondly of.
We are here in New York, Pix 11, doing the show today because this is where everything's happening. Just a few days away, there is going to be a mayoral race that we're going to talk all about, brand new polling from Spencer. And then a stone's throw across a river here, there's going to be a statewide governor's race in a few days as well, next Tuesday for both. And Henry's got all the details on what's been going on the ground for both races. He's been covering this for Pix 11 for the better part of a year, really, or two. For
Ever
these
since the
races.
presidential wrapped up.
Yep, as soon as the presidential. So it's been a crazy time here for both of these races. But without further ado, since you guys are all right next to me, this is awesome. It had never happened before. A first for Political Power Ranker. Let's get to our first race in Spencer's numbers. This one is a New York City's mayor's race. It's been seen across the country. Spencer's got new numbers. Spencer, but first tell us about the poll. How did this poll happen? What's the makeup?
Well, in New York City, it's a minority majority city. And so sometimes different data collection methods work better based on the constituents that we're collecting it from. So in this situation, we used online polling, which is a panel of people that have opted into these polls. And then we randomly select people through texting. And then we send out text messages. So that's how the data was collected. And we had about over 650 people take the survey.
How many did you have to reach out to in order to make the survey happen?
Well, the response rate is slightly low. I would say on the text messages, it's about 20,000 people in order to get about 300 completes. But on the online panels, because they've already opted in, much higher response rate. But we compare those data sets to be able to verify, if the online is skewed or if the texting is skewed.
Got it. All right. A lot of magic.
No magic. No magic. It's communication.
And a lot of analysis and smart breakdown of numbers, right?
Yeah, that's what we're going to take a look at.
All right, let's
When we
look
get
at
all of that information back. How do you interpret that data that it is representing what we think public opinion is?
So let's look at that first data set, New York mayor's race. Dun, da, da, da. Here's what we have.
Yeah, it's exciting race to see. You have Mamdani, who has picked up 7 points in the last since the last poll in September. And look at Curtis Sliwa. He's picked up 11 points in that time. The concern is obviously for Andrew Cuomo. He's dropped 3 points since this campaign has really come into focus for voters. And we're going to see obviously what happens on election day. But it looks like Mamdani has been able to continue, and that Sliwa has kind of been a thorn in the side of Cuomo as he tried to launch as the alternative to Mamdani.
The opportunity there with Adams leaving the race since the last poll until now was to gobble up those voters and then, kind of consolidate some undecided for Andrew Cuomo. That didn't happen really.
And to force Sliwa out, which also didn't happen.
Right.
Well, yeah, the combination of those two, with Sliwa still in there, and when we take a look at, when we get into these numbers and we start breaking down the racial groups, the age groups, you'll realize how Sliwa does pull away from that Cuomo vote. So even though Mamdani doesn't do as well, it's not hurting him because you got Sliwa there that's holding down any opposition to where he sits with those demographics.
So Henry, you've been tracking this race on the ground, watching these guys move around the city.
Mm-hmm.
First, before we talk about numbers with you, tell us what you're kind of seeing and hearing. What's the vibe like in each one of these campaigns?
A lot of excitement, both online and in person from Mamdani. And then also in person, you see a lot of canvassers, a lot of Sliwa signs around town. What you don't see from former Governor Andrew Cuomo is anything resembling a ground game, to be frank. Not a lot of signs, not a lot of volunteers. He's really just making sort of this big picture case that he's the only one that can catch up to Mamdani, that he's the true Democrat, that a democratic socialist, which Mamdani is not equipped to lead the Democratic Party and to lead the city. We've also just seen a lot of excitement around the election, way more so than normal. Early voting through the first 4 days is about 5.5 times what it was 4 years ago during a very low turnout election where we saw Mayor Eric Adams get elected. Now, that race wasn't nearly as competitive, but still to see 5x, 5.5x turnout is absolutely incredible, particularly among our older New Yorkers over the age of 55, which is how the Board of Election breaks it down here. We're seeing very high turnout among that demographic right now.
Now, you had shared with me a little bit of information on what you're seeing anecdotally with that over 55 crowd.
Yeah, there's sort of a lot of wish casting from Cuomo and even from Sliwa to a certain extent that this older electorate might favor them. But in going to these early election sites, and again, this is anecdotal, it's certainly not scientific like what Spencer does, but I'll talk to voters who are seniors and, maybe Cuomo or Sliwa would hope would vote for them. And what I'm hearing, frankly, Chris and Spencer, is, give the kid a shot, meaning Mamdani. So, it's not a straight line between, you're old automatically and you don't support Mamdani, although his base of support is certainly younger. It's certainly more of a mixed bag. This is not a straight line to, Cuomo's going to pull off this upset. It's more nuanced than that. In fact, it may even favor, according to the numbers, I believe, Spencer, Mamdani has a slight advantage among older New Yorkers, right?
And he does. So he's crushing it with the younger New Yorkers. Those under 50, he's winning with 70% of the vote. But those over 50, he's only getting 37%. And so to Cuomo's point, he's like, hey, I've got 63% sitting over here. I can take it. But he's not. Sliwa is taking 37% of that vote. Cuomo's actually getting the third lowest of those older voters. It's going to Mamdani, then Sliwa, then to Cuomo. So while that vote might be a little higher, it's not necessarily going to benefit Cuomo directly.
Now, there's one thing in this poll that was striking to me when I first looked at it. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to look down and go, Adami's got 50% in your poll. I mean, that's kind of that line of demarcation that we always look at. Can you get above 50 or right at 50? He did in this poll. While others, pundits, pollsters, right now are saying, this race is tightening and, he may have a shot, Andrew Cuomo. You're showing quite the opposite.
Yeah, no, we don't see it in that light. Now, remember in the primaries, we had a similar argument that we were discussing where we had Mamdani and everybody else said, no, Cuomo's got this in the bag. And we said, no, Cuomo's got a ceiling at 35%. We've got 4 polls. He's at 35%. And what happened on election day? He had a ceiling, 35. He has the same ceiling come the general election here. And in fact, that ceiling might be lower than what it was in the primary. And that might give Sliwa a shot to upset him. Very far shot.
And Spencer's being modest because he's running the only major pollster that even came close to sniffing a Mamdani victory. So let's be clear about the work that he's doing. He got the closest. I think you had him winning in a ranked choice scenario, barely losing in a straight up scenario, and he blew it out by 13 points, and you were the only one even close. So when we see these numbers of Mamdani blowing it out, a high level of confidence based on very recent history here.
From a man on the ground saying, pay attention to this guy. That's what I'm hearing. So, we'll find out Tuesday, but this does not bode well for Andrew Cuomo. One of the things, Henry, you were saying to me earlier, too, is, and this may kind of indicate why these numbers are the way they are, the number of volunteers for Mamdani that are out there canvassing. You've got some anecdotal.
Yeah, so tens of thousands of volunteers. I think the latest number I saw was 90,000 volunteers. They were able to knock every registered Democrat during the primary phase twice. And their volunteer base has only grown. I don't think they're claiming to have knocked everyone in the city for this general election campaign or any sort of claim like that. But they are saying they are out there knocking literally hundreds of thousands of doors every single weekend. There's a palpable excitement. There's a palpable canvassing and ground game effort. Mamdani is not a social media sensation. And I know that many people outside of New York City may be perceiving it. It is something we here in the city are seeing on the ground. My home in Brooklyn was knocked 3 times during the general election and was not during the primary and 3 times during the general election already. And I'm kind of in Brownstone, Brooklyn, which is deeply, deeply sort of liberal. So that makes sense relative to his base of support. But you see it out there. You feel it out there. It is real. It is not just a TikTok video.
You've got another kind of a deep dive and a cut of the numbers here on the racial breakdown of who's voting for whom. So let's look at that.
But this was a key piece for Cuomo. He needed to win the black vote. That was the base of his support coming up. And if you notice, that black vote is actually breaking for Mamdani now. So he did not make up ground with black voters. Mamdani picked up 20 points. And then look at the white vote. Again, Cuomo should have made inroads there. And Mamdani didn't pick up the white vote.
But there is Curtis Sliwa taking that vote out from Cuomo. So any pathway that Cuomo had to tighten this race, it looks like Sliwa blocked him off by running a pretty effective campaign, at least from what we see, like the people that voted for him last time, 82-6 favorability for Curtis Sliwa.
If I may, because
Yeah.
there's been a lot of conjecture about what your Sliwa voters would and would not do if he wasn't in the race. What Sliwa has made, and I found to be relatively true based on interviewing many of his supporters, it's not like these folks would automatically go to Cuomo. Sliwa makes the case they would largely stay home or write in a candidate. And that's based on the former governor's long history as it relates to how he handled nursing homes during the pandemic, which is very controversial, how he handled, I mean, even things like marriage equality, legalizing gay marriage in this state, which is broadly popular in New York, but among, die-in-the-wool Republicans is not necessarily a popular issue. So Sliwa makes the case, it's not, you can't just add my number and his number and then you get a number bigger than Mamdani. Sliwa says, I'm staying in this race because my supporters want me to stay in this race. It's not like they're ever going to go to Cuomo. At least that's the case that he's making.
And remember, he got about 27-28% last time. And so right now we're seeing 75% of his votes staying with him, and that's why he's at 20% in our poll.
All right, Henry, two quick questions for you before we have to go to a break. What has Mamdani done right?
He has steered clear of the very big mistake, including on the debate stage. And the second debate he had of this general round about a week or so ago was his weakest debate. He waffled a little bit on some housing policy, but he avoided the big mistake. He avoided stepping in it. And with these polls, you needed some sort of game-changing moment, and Mamdani never gave it to Cuomo or Sliwa.
What has Cuomo done wrong?
Cuomo has not actually corrected the mistakes he made during the Democratic primary, despite saying that he would. He still doesn't have a canvassing game, which we've discussed. He really doesn't have a social media game, even though we are seeing a little bit more of it in some videos cut online as opposed to none during the primary round. But he also really hasn't, in a particularly upfront way, addressed some of the mistakes, real and perceived, of the past. He's largely dismissed them as political. I can tell you I've talked to a number of voters that were waiting to come around with him but wanted to see a higher level of contrition that he was unwilling to show at this point.
Is there anything in your mind from from a political sense that can happen for him to make this a much closer race based on Spencer's numbers?
Not necessarily for him, but against Mamdani. There's been a number of reports that Mamdani has friends, allies, supporters that are really on the intersection of Muslim extremism, including one podcaster known as Hassan Piker, which Sliwa and Cuomo have tried to make an issue of. He said, quote unquote, America deserved 9/11. So some particularly vile things this man has said. He was actually at a big rally that Mamdani held just this past weekend with Bernie Sanders and AOC. He was there as a credentialed member of the media, which is how Mamdani sort of explained that away. But if there was some sort of piece of tape, video, old audio sound, old tweet that hasn't yet to be uncovered, and most of this stuff has come to light, so I don't know that it's out there, really at the intersection of some of this extremism that Cuomo and Sliwa have tried to tie him to. If there was a more concrete tie that were to come out between now and Election Day, I feel like that is perhaps the last remaining thing that could move the needle. And to be clear, I'm not suggesting that it exists, and Mamdani has disavowed much of this language. But if there's an old piece of something out there and it comes out, that's potentially a game changer. I'm not sure there's anything affirmatively that Cuomo could do at this point.
Spencer, any thoughts there?
He needed to do that weeks ago, like what we see down in Virginia. We'll talk about that next week. But yeah, it's too late. Everyone's voting and people are kind of locked in. And if they hear this last second bits of information, they have to realize, do I trust it or not? And you got to give people time to digest debates, digest, these crises. And we'll see if that crisis even exists. And if it doesn't, I'm not sure what the pathway is, particularly what's the long term. Because if he has a very poor showing Cuomo, he can't really run again. So he's got to be thinking longevity about his own, career.
All right, we got to leave it right there for the Big Apple, where this race for Spencer is at least a 20-point race, maybe more. But we got one closer, right across the river in New Jersey. This one is neck and neck. We're going to talk about that when we come back on Political Power Ranker. Welcome back to Political Power Ranker, where we are in the house at Pix 11 in New York City. Spencer Kimball with Emerson College Polling, the director there, and Henry Rossoff, political reporter here at Pix 11, joining us for an in-person political power ranker. So, big election on Tuesday, right across the river here in New York and New Jersey. And for the governor, Spencer, talk to us about your brand new poll there.
So yeah, we had a chance to look at New Jersey. And in this poll, we did a slightly different data collection method. We used landlines here and texting mobile phones, not the online component. And that's because in New Jersey, it's an easier landline base to be able to collect from as opposed to New York City, where it's more difficult. So we supplement our texting with online. Here we supplement the texting with landlines, both giving us probability samples. And again, if you want to get in the weeds of the pollster, we're comparing these different samples to see, hey, are they looking the same, or is there big differences? And what we found was a very consistent. So we're looking forward to looking at these numbers.
I mean, for anyone who, like me, who loves looking at polling, I'm looking at the end number. I'm looking at how the poll was gathered in the field, and I'm looking at likely or registered voters.
Yeah, those are key things to be looking at. And even the mode of data collection is going to have a skewed. So if it was all landlines, that data is going to skew to the right. If it's all online, it's probably going to skew to the left. So you got to be careful of how that data works. We've got 20 years of experience looking at this, and that's why when we get that data back, it may look that way, but I said, no, it's biased because of this, and that's how we get to our results.
Well, let's get to those results.
Sure.
New Jersey, man, this is a barn burner.
It sure is. It sure is. We saw that last month. It was a tied race, 43-43, and it really hasn't moved too much. Slightly in Cheryl's favor in the polling, but we'll see if the turnout game will be different. The big thing here is what we saw in that gender divide.
Mm-hmm. Were you surprised it was still this close?
Well, not in our polling, because our numbers usually don't move too much. So when we did that first poll, that was more surprising because all the other polls at the time were at like 8 or 10 points. And I'm like, wow, we're significantly different here. If you've looked now, all of those other polls are about 3 to 5 points. And if you look here, we're about 1 to 2. So we've all kind of come together in seeing the race in a similar way.
About time they caught up.
Well, eventually.
So, Henry, tell us what you're seeing on the ground.
Well, I mean, it's on the ground and on TV, because if you turn on TV here in New York City, much different than the New York City race in New Jersey, which broadcasts across New York television. Cheryl commercial, Chitterelli commercial, splashy ones on the World Series during Knicks games. Really picking up intensity. You can't, click online without being force-fed some sort of gubernatorial ad. On the ground, it's a little bit tougher to have a big canvas bus game. Cheryl just kicked off a big bus tour, which really more about optics than reaching a maximum number of voters. She's got a big rally coming up with Barack Obama, which should indicate to a certain extent that she, does not have this thing locked up. I think your numbers, are fairly clear. I'm sure her internals are telling her a similar story. Chitterelli barnstorming across South Jersey, particularly along the shore, which is his base of support. So turnout is his game at this point. You're not seeing him hit the big inner cities like Hoboken, Newark, Jersey City, that sort of thing. That's Democratic country. He's leaving it alone. He's trying to drive up the numbers in the suburbs. And sorry, go ahead, Chris.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, and Cheryl's really banking on a big vote by mail effort, which could very much so be indicative and shape what we are physically seeing as returns come in on election night. And we can absolutely get into that if you like.
And they are getting a little bit more vote by mail than they were back in 21.
Yeah, well, I mean, vote by mail was big in 21 coming off the pandemic a little bit. Cheryl's indicating that this might be even bigger for her this time. She's indicating something like 200,000 vote by mail ballots. And if the number is that high, and Cheryl is correct about that, it's vote by mail Democrats. She's assuming those are all her votes, which may not be a straight line assumption. But if it's a large majority of Democrats, then you very well on your election day returns, because Republicans led by President Trump have encouraged in-person election day voting, we'll see a Chitterelli-friendly number on election night, perhaps a lead by a couple of percentage points. And then as the votes get counted in the days that it was known as sort of a red mirage, as was become known in recent election cycles, as the votes get counted, and we saw this in 21, you could see Cheryl end up passing Chitterelli. It'll be a question of whether or not Chitterelli has built up that advantage. And then I'll add to that that this is the exact intersection and confluence of events where you've seen Republicans led by President Trump claim fraud or misdeeds at this sort of moment of uncertainty. And that's something we'll be watching very carefully, and going to the polling places, observing the counting, and doing our best to discern if there's anything to those claims.
You've got men and women breakdown.
Yeah, the gender divide. And this is something that we were looking at last poll because the women, if you look in September, 18% were undecided. And we said, well, how are they going to break? Are they going to go over to Cheryl, which would be a natural inkling, or are they going to Chettarelli win them over? And it looks like they moved over to Cheryl. She picked up 12 points. Chettarelli only picked up 4 amongst women voters. But the male voters, she didn't pick up. Cheryl didn't pick up any of the male vote. Chettarelli picked up 5 points there. So he's up 16 with male voters. She's up 18 with female voters. It's a toss-up race.
Henry, you seeing that in the field?
I would say so. I mean, it's very anecdotal on my end based on who I interview, but I would say that that's absolutely playing out. Who I interview, who says they support Cheryl, predominantly women. Who I interview saying they support Chettarelli, predominantly men. This does mirror somewhat national trend, right, Spencer? If I'm not mistaken.
Exactly. So President Trump was very popular with men, and Vice President Harris was very popular with women in that election. And frankly, since Trump has come onto the scene, we have seen a large gender divide across the country in 2016, and it looks to be growing here in New Jersey.
And that's one of the things voters will grapple with this time. In 2021, you had a version of Jack Chettarelli was running away from Trump, and now you have a version of Jack Chettarelli running toward President Trump. And a very interesting data point, I think, that will reflect nationally, how much does it heading into 26, how much does hugging President Trump actually matter? Can it win you a tight competitive race? And I think there will be important national lessons to be learned from this election.
We got a handful of days left before the Tuesday election. I'm going to ask you both the same question. What are you looking for in the course of the next few days that may give you like a bellwether where this is heading?
Well, I think Cheryl's driving out her vote. That early vote numbers, the more data that comes out will give us an indication if that mail-in balloting is happening at that degree. On the Chettarelli side, I'm interested to see if President Trump does come to town. I know that he's in Asia right now, and I know they're doing teletown halls, but he would be somebody who could drive out turnout for the Republican base. And if it's close enough, that could be a game changer.
Henry?
I'd be interested to see specifically the enthusiasm for Cheryl at this big Barack Obama rally. If it's many, many thousands of people, like they're indicating that it is, it would show that there's enthusiasm and they're not just voting against something, Chettarelli, which is really a proxy vote against President Trump, but affirmatively voting for something. We were talking about Mamdani. That's one of his big success stories. He's getting Democrats to vote for something as opposed to against something, which has not been the motivation of most Democratic voters in the Trump era. So I'm interested to see the enthusiasm at that very specific rally and see if it is some sort of indicator about how motivated Democrats are this time around.
Especially that minority vote. That's why Obama's coming out there, is to pull out that minority vote that was staying in for Harris in 24. Can they come out in 25? Because if they stay in, then the turnout models that we have are going to be slightly off, and Chettarelli's going to pull off an upset.
What struck me the most on Sunday of this past weekend was the energy at the Mamdani rally that was here in New York. I haven't seen that kind of energy probably since Obama in 2008, his first run, where people were just psyched to go and be part of something that they thought was something that was making a difference. And they came out in droves, numbers we had never seen before. That's how I felt when I watched the Mamdani rally on Sunday.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen that
way to
with
see
Cheryl.
it. Yeah. I mean, I don't think anyone right now, I don't know if there's a more electric politician in the country other than President Trump that's doing what Mamdani is doing right now. And I include Bernie Sanders and AOC in that, who are on the stage with Mamdani. They kind of become this unified wing of the Democratic Party. I don't know that Cheryl can hope for that, if we're being just reasonable here. But if she can hope for a percentage of that, I mean, it's going to be a very important indicator.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, it is what we all wait for each week: who's up and who's down from Spencer. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to Political Power Ranker. We got a round table of people, I was going with my words there. Got a little ahead of myself. Henry Rossoff, Pix 11 reporter, a savant in politics, and then, of course, the man, the myth, the legend, Spencer Kimball, Emerson College Polling. Spencer, this is your time now. Who's up and who's down this week? Let's go with up.
So we'll start who's up, and individually, Zoran Mamdani. He comes out of nowhere in January, February, in
1%.
1%, and boom, he's expected to become the next mayor of New York City. So we brought him up. There's lots to discuss of why he's up, but we see him up this week.
He'd be the youngest mayor in 125 years. A little fun fact for you there.
Wow, that's crazy. 34.
He's 34. They was 30. I forget the name, but he was 31 in 1889. I was just looking this up for election night prep in case you were. I don't just
That
know
is
this
good.
off the top of my head.
Good to know. And we've got kind of another one that's up a little bit.
Yeah, there's a state that's up on the radar. There was some discussion. Maybe New Jersey is a new battleground state of 2028, potentially 2026. Some are advocating that they become first in the nation in their vote totals. We'll see, but it seems like New Jersey's getting a little bit more action than in the past.
Well, if Jack Shirley is able to pull it out, it gives credence to that for sure.
That is correct. And even a tight race might make this state in play.
All right, now let's go with who's down.
Who's down this week is former Governor Andrew Cuomo. He was really the odds-on favorite to win this race maybe 6-7 months ago. But now he's trailing. He's actually doing worse now than he was when we started polling in September. So it doesn't look like this campaign has worked well for him.
Henry, this goes into the category, who would have thunk it a year ago?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying beating, we didn't think someone couldn't beat Cuomo. There's a lot of anti-Cuomo energy out there. We did not think a 34-year-old Democratic Socialist Assemblyman from Queens who's been in office for 4 years could beat him. I mean, you'll remember some names from future past of Brad Lander and Scott Stringer and others who were sort of thrown out there as maybe an alternative with some seasoned experience. But you promise free buses, you promise universal child care, you promise free food at grocery store or government grocery stores, not necessarily free, but at cost. He's making some big promises. And so I think now the focus will be on, if he wins, can he deliver?
Yeah, but he also brought energy, ideas, a ground game that didn't rely on television advertising, but use social media, being creative, being different, not just
think
follow
about this,
the
the
same
youthfulness of the Democratic Party. It's either Mamdani or Cuomo. Who would you think is really the future of that party?
and reflective of
A voter told me the other day, it's like if we want young, dynamic, new change, talking about both Biden and Trump, frankly, then we have to vote for it. Like,
Right.
maybe he doesn't have all the experience I want, but if I want change, I have to vote for it. That's how he was justifying his vote to me.
Guys, we got to leave it there. I know we could talk for another hour, but we've got to leave it there. Got a couple of pieces of business before we go away. Number one is don't forget Picks on Politics, Dan Manarino's show. Henry's a contributor or host often. Don't forget that this weekend you are going to see a prep show for the two big races in the Pix 11 area. And then look on your social media, Twitter on Emerson College Twitter page, look for Pix 11's Twitter page and their website. Not Pix 11, sorry, wavy.com and their social media pages where we're going to have a Virginia poll released. Virginia's election is Tuesday as well. Big governor's race down there. So a new Virginia poll.
And the
coming.
Attorney General.
Pardon?
And the Attorney General.
The Attorney General, yes. We'll have the Attorney General as well, which those who've been following this know that's been a very controversial race for AG. Jay Jones had that all but wrapped up. And now, through a misstep from a few years ago, it's a head-to-head horse race
It looks that way.
with the incumbent. So, all right. Thank you very much for watching Political Power Ranker. Having my two favorite people together in Pix 11 studios doing it. And until we see you next week, we'll have another national poll and we'll wrap up all of this as well in our next edition. So thanks for joining. We'll see you then.